There's a strange curiosity that shows up when people are asked a simple question. Not how they'll die, but when. Some people treat it like a game, a number on a screen, a countdown that doesn't feel real. Others take it more seriously. They check the date, they remember it, and when the day gets closer, something shifts. Time starts to feel different. Not faster, not slower, just heavier. Because it's one thing to imagine an end somewhere out in the distance. It's something else entirely to wonder if it's already been set. Tonight on the Midnight Drive, we're sitting with the idea of death clocks and what it does to the mind when time starts to feel like it's running out or already decided. There's a certain kind of question most people don't spend much time sitting with. Not because it's complicated, but because it feels too specific. Not if you'll die, not even how, but when. A date, a time, a fixed point somewhere ahead of you. Somewhere you could circle on a calendar. For most of human history, that kind of certainty didn't exist. Death was present, but undefined. It could come suddenly, quietly, unexpectedly. And because of that, people built rituals around it, ways to acknowledge it without trying to control it. In some parts of the world, when someone died, every clock in the house would be stopped. Not adjusted, not reset. Stopped. The hands frozen at the exact moment life ended. It was a way of marking something final. A way of saying, this was the moment time changed. In some traditions, it was also meant to protect the living. To keep whatever had just passed from lingering. To prevent something else from following. Whether or not people believed that literally, the act itself carried weight. Time paused, held in place, not moving forward again until after the funeral, until things had settled. There's something honest about that. It doesn't try to predict anything. It doesn't try to get ahead of the moment. It just recognizes that something has already happened and sits with it. But over time, that relationship with death started to shift. Less ritual, more measurement, more data, more attempts to understand not just that life ends, but how long it lasts. And eventually, that led to something much more specific, something that feels almost out of place when you think hard about it. The idea that you could enter a few details about yourself and be given a countdown. A number ticking down toward a moment you haven't reached yet. Modern death clocks are usually presented that way. Simple inputs, age, lifestyle, habits. Sometimes more detailed information. Diet, stress, medical history. And then an output, a projected lifespan. Sometimes even an exact date. But there's an important distinction that often gets lost with all this. These tools are not predictions, they're estimates, built from population data, averages, patterns across large groups of people. They can suggest trends. They can show how certain choices might shift outcomes over time, but they cannot account for the randomness that shapes individual lives. Accidents, unexpected illness, small, unpredictable variables that don't fit cleanly into a model. Even more advanced versions, the ones built with large data sets and more complex analysis, don't attempt to pinpoint a single moment. At best, they can identify probabilities, windows of likelihood, not a fixed endpoint. That uncertainty matters because without it, the number starts to take on a different kind of meaning, something heavier, something more personal. And for some people, that's where the experience changes. It stops being a curiosity and starts becoming something that they carry with them, a date in the back of their mind. Not always at the surface, but present, waiting. If that date is far enough away, it might not feel like much, just an abstract point somewhere in the future. But as time moves forward, the distance closes in. And at a certain point, it becomes close enough to notice, close enough to think about. What would that day feel like? Would anything seem different? Would you wake up and know? Or would it feel like any other day, until it didn't? Some people try to ignore it, treat it like a number that doesn't mean anything. Others do the opposite. They pay attention, they fixate, they watch the clock. They move carefully, avoiding all risks. Avoiding anything that might bring that moment closer. And even if nothing does happen, the experience itself changes the way that time feels. Because now time isn't just passing, it's approaching something. There's a direction to it. A sense of movement toward a point that may or may not exist. That shift doesn't come from the number itself. It comes from what that number represents. Certainty. Or at least the illusion of it. A fixed outcome. Something already decided. Even if logically you know that that's not how it works, the mind doesn't always respond to logic first. It responds to framing. And once time is framed that way, as something counting down, it's really difficult to completely unsee it. There's an older version of this that feels a little more subtle, less precise, but maybe a little more honest. The idea of a clock stopping, not predicting the moment, just marking it once. It's past. No countdown, no anticipation, just recognition. Something has ended. And for a moment, everything holds still. The modern version tries to move that moment forward. It's another thing entirely to feel like that ending has a location, a specific point waiting for you. Even if it's only a number on a screen, even if it's based on averages, even if it's not real in the way it presents itself, the feeling can still be. And once that feeling is there, time doesn't feel quite the same, does it? Not because anything actually changed, but because the way you're looking at it has. Instead of something open, it starts to feel like something narrowing, moving towards something fixed, something that might already be set. Whether you can see it clearly or not. And that raises a quieter question. Not about whether those predictions are accurate, but about what it does to a person to believe, even for a moment, that the end has already been decided, and all that's left is the time in between. Have you ever messed around with a death clock? Have you ever looked one up online? Has the day come? What was that day like? Did you even remember? Did the thought linger with you after you saw the date and the time? We'd love to hear your story. Let us know in the comments below, or reach out to us and leave us a message at the Midnight Drive. at 402-610-2836. There's a way most of us think about time that feels very straightforward. Something happens, then we become aware of it, cause, then effect. Action, then understanding. It feels immediate, connected, like we're always moving alongside events as they unfold. But that isn't always how it works, is it? There are systems in the world where the outcome can be set into motion before most people are aware that anything has happened at all. Not seconds later, not minutes later, but long enough to matter, long enough to exist inside a space where something has already begun. And you're still living in the moment before you even understand it. One of the clearest examples of that idea exists in something called mutually assured destruction. It's not a device, not a single system, it's more of a structure. A way of thinking about conflict that developed during the Cold War. The premise is actually very simple. If two sides both have the ability to cause catastrophic damage, and both sides have the ability to respond even after being attacked, then neither side has an incentive to strike first, because doing so would guarantee their own destruction. Not possibly, not theoretically, but with a level of certainty that's difficult to ignore. That idea rests on something called a second strike capability. The ability to absorb an initial attack and still respond in a way that causes equal or greater damage. Which means any first move becomes, in effect, self-defeating. You initiate something that ensures the same outcome returns to you. On paper, it creates a kind of balance. Not peaceful, but stable. A system where the cost of high action is so high that inaction becomes the only rational choice. That's the theory, at least. And for the most part, it worked the way it was intended to. Not because the systems were perfect, but because the consequences were definitely understood, at least at a high level. But underneath that stability, there's another layer, one that doesn't get talked about as often, because it's much harder to sit with. The timeline. What actually happens between the moment something is initiated and the moment the outcome arrives. There isn't always an immediate collapse. There isn't always instant awareness. Instead, there can be a window, a stretch of time where systems are already moving. Decisions have already been made. Processes have already begun. And most people are still inside their normal routines. That gap exists for practical reasons. Distance, speed, verification. Even in highly advanced systems, things take time to travel, to be confirmed, to be understood. And during that time, life continues. People wake up, make coffee, check their phones, go to work, have conversations with each other, completely unaware that somewhere else something has already been set into motion. That idea can feel very abstract until you look at moments where the gap has actually existed. Not in full-scale outcomes, but in close calls. Situations where systems indicated something had happened when it hadn't. Or where something did happen, and it took time to fully understand what it meant. In 1979, a simulation error at a U.S. Defense Command Center briefly indicated that a large-scale missile attack was underway. Alarms went off. Personnel moved into position. Preparations began. For a short period of time, the system reflected a reality that wasn't actually happening. It was a mistake, a training scenario that had been loaded incorrectly. But for the people inside the moment, it did not feel like a simulation. It felt like the beginning of something irreversible. That's the edge of the system. Not just the technology, but the human experience of all of it. Because even when everything functions as intended, there's still that window, that space between initiation and awareness. And most of us assume we would recognize it. That if something significant were happening, we would know immediately, clearly, without any kind of delay. But that assumption depends on a kind of direct connection between events and perception. And that connection isn't always as immediate as it feels. Sometimes awareness lags behind reality. Sometimes the cause exists before the effect reaches you. And during that delay, everything feels normal, which creates a strange kind of tension in and of itself, not because something is visibly wrong, but because in certain scenarios, normal doesn't necessarily mean safe. It just means you haven't reached the point of awareness yet. That's where this idea starts to overlap with something more personal. Because even outside of large systems, we experience smaller versions of this all the time. Medical conditions that develop without obvious symptoms. Situations that shift gradually before we notice. Moments where something changes, and we only understand it after the fact. The difference here is scale and consequence, but the structure is very similar. Something begins, time passes, understanding arrives later. And in between those points, there's a stretch of time where you're still moving through the world, as if nothing has changed. That's the part that's difficult to sit with. Not the outcome itself, but the idea that there can be a period where the outcome is already determined, and you're still inside the space before it comes visible. It's not something most people think about very often, because it doesn't fit neatly into the way we like to understand time. We prefer that things line up, that they feel synchronized, to believe that awareness and reality move together. But there are edges where the alignment breaks down, where systems move faster than perception, or where distance creates delay, or where information takes time to reach the people it affects. And in those moments, time feels different, not because it's changed, but because your position inside of it has. You're no longer moving alongside events as they happen, you're moving slightly behind them, experiencing the effect after the cause has already taken place. Most of the time, the gap is small enough that it doesn't even matter. It closes quickly. Things make sense again. But in certain scenarios, that gap stretches. And within that stretch, there's a quiet, almost invisible phase of time where something has already started. Something that can't easily be undone. And the only thing that hasn't caught up yet is awareness. Now that doesn't mean those outcomes are inevitable, or that they're constantly unfolding. But it does mean the structure exists. The possibility is there. And once you recognize that, it changes the way you think about time. Not as something that always reveals itself immediately, but as something that carries a delay sometimes. A space between what's happening and what's known. And in that space, everything can feel completely ordinary, right up until it doesn't.